So, that happened. And not only that happened, but this happened. Well, first of all, thanks so much to everybody who shared the video. I can't believe how much attention these two videos got in such a short span of time. Second of all, I've been really surprised by how much intelligence and civility there has been in the comment section. I mean, sure, there are a few idiots, there always is, but for the most part, everybody who watched the two videos seemed to understand the gravity of the game's message. They put aside tribalism and engaged in honest, friendly debate. Even the people who criticized my views for the most part were very diplomatic, and for that reason I wanted to reward people's kindness by responding to various criticisms people have left me. Hopefully this will keep everybody satiated until my next major video. Glow Zoe writes, was enjoying this till the Orwellian mention 1984 is a book about language. Well, don't blame me for invoking Orwell. See, 1984 was a huge influence on Hideo Kojima and the Metal Gear Solid series. You see the themes of 1984 invoked in almost all the games, particularly in Metal Gear Solid 5 with its heavy emphasis on language regulation and, of course, the Big Boss is watching you posters. Just because 1984's main focus is on language doesn't mean that it isn't about other things. 1984 focused on changing old forms of language into newspeak, and Metal Gear Solid 2 was about editing language. Sure, the concepts are different, but the underlying themes are the same. Vian Bravo writes, gayest video I've seen. Yeah, well, your mom's fat. Haha! I win! The Great One 1022 writes, I don't like everyone calling this prophetic, as this has been a recurring problem since the dawn of civilization. It's cool, but not prophetic. I also disagree with the idea that people solidifying their ideologies as depicted in those graphs is bad. That consistency is better than the slippery slope middle ground. Well, the Great One is actually correct in his assertion that this has been a problem for as long as we have been civilized. Anybody who in the comments that might be claiming this is a new problem is wrong. However, I hope the Great One isn't claiming that this was my or Kojima's original assertion. The original assertion was that this problem was going to take on an evolved form in the digital era, a much more complex form. Whether you can say that's prophetic or not, I don't know. The only thing I care about is how efficiently a video game articulated the problem long before the masses gave it proper attention. As for people solidifying their ideologies, what exactly do you mean? If by solidify you mean researching a complex topic and formulating a position backed by evidence, that's fine. If by solidify you mean people firmly planting themselves on one side of the political spectrum and not entertaining outside ideas in a rational way, then that's not fine. It's the same thing for the middle ground. Let's say somebody finds themselves on the center of the political spectrum because they're socially liberal and fiscally conservative, and they came to that position in a non-dogmatic way. Is that a slippery slope? I don't think so. It's only a slippery slope if the person willing to find middle ground is doing so because they're too emotionally and intellectually fragile to hold any position on any issue. Dr. Dubious says, after careful studying and considering my opponent's arguments, I have come to a conclusion. I still disagree 100%. So I guess now we can live in peace. Very funny. No. If you disagree with somebody 100%, you have to explain why. Back up your arguments with evidence and argue on the basis of reason. The moment your opponent retreats to faulty data, emotional arguments, or bad debate tactics is when progress is made. That progress takes the form of onlookers coming to their own reasonable empirical conclusions about who is right, and then rewarding who makes the best argument. Of course, this is easier said than done, but I hope I made a decent argument about why it is up to the individual to set a good example, and thus pave the way for more ideal debates in the future. Ones that aren't headed by corrupt politicians or populists exploiting emotion. Henry Bleich, I think that's how you pronounce it, he says, I would like to point out that these concepts are not new even for 2001, but more or less a dying argument and lesson people often forget. Hopefully we will make a good AI and it will do something like what this one suggests to best humanity before it's all lost. Okay, so we sort of addressed the first part of what Henry said when we addressed the Great One's comment. As for the second part, I have to respond by saying I'm not so hopeful. Why? Well, let me put it to you this way. Humans are imperfect creatures, right? Imagine them trying to create a perfect machine. One programmer just has to make one miscalculation and then boom, you got World War III or something. A good example of this is the state of the world in Metal Gear Solid 4. One miscalculation and human human beings are killing each other to sustain the war economy. Another potential problem is how to select the programmers. To create an impartial system, one would need to select human beings that are completely free of ideological bias, and I'm not convinced that such a human exists. Like, what if this system was completely constructed by engineers from Silicon Valley, an area that has a large population of left-leaning individuals? The potential that conservative truths get lost in the process is extremely high. Now, some liberals and lefties might think that's perfectly fine, but good luck getting billions of conservative-minded people to sign on to such an experiment without widespread violence. Those are just a couple of potential problems that come to mind. Moving on. Mark Smith writes, I don't have time to watch this right now. Did he mention anything about The Last of Us? If this discussion is about video game stories and narrative without any mention of The Last of Us, whatever he said is false. Oh dear. Mark, listen man, I share your love for The Last of Us, and I know it's cool to hate on the game now for some reason, but I don't care. The Last of Us is amazing. However, as good as the story and gameplay are in that game, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as profound. When I say profound, I use it as a descriptor of something with great knowledge or insight, rather than just general quality. And while the characters and narrative of The Last of Us are peak fantastic, I wouldn't describe much of it as containing great knowledge or insight, with a couple of exceptions. For instance, I think the ending of The Last of Us could be considered profound because I think it was the perfect way to end that particular story. Now, I won't spoil anything for those of you who haven't played it, but the way the ending made you empathize with Joel and make you ask yourself what you would do in his position are questions I still ask myself. Yet, as good as that ending was, I wouldn't say it matches the level of profundity of a Spec Ops The Line or a Soma or a Metal Gear. That being said, I know lots of people will disagree with me, and that's cool. If you think The Last of Us is more profound than Metal Gear, leave your comments down below and I'd love to hear your argument. Ninja5672 writes, wow, you took a hard left. It's kind of funny how shallow a view you have of the world, while commenting on deep societal observations. Stalin didn't kill millions because he didn't want to accept their truth. He killed them because they were threatening his power and because he didn't have enough food. Oh my god. Okay. Ninja, let me ask you this. Does the term dekulakization mean anything to you? See, the reason why there wasn't any food under Stalin was because any moderately successful farmer in the USSR was deported to Siberia between 1929 and 1932. Because Stalin ordered the deportation of the farmers that were actually good at their job, 6 million Ukrainians starved to death in the Holodomor. On top of that, any of the starving peasants that tried to find ears of grain after it had been rounded up by the collectivists were punished with 20 years of forced labor in the gulags, which was the maximum punishment. Now, why would Stalin do that? Maybe it had to do with the fact that he didn't want to accept the truth that communism, wait for it, kills. Not just in the Soviet Union, but China, Cambodia, North Korea, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Vietnam, and many others. And unfortunately, just like I said in the original video, people will continue to justify murderous systems rather than take a look at the wretchedness of their own souls. Franger, or is that Franker? I don't know. Franger writes, stories are the problem with video games. Game first, story second. As a general rule, I would agree that gameplay should come first and stories second. However, I would take issue with making such a blanket statement as stories are the problem with video games. In fact, there have been instances where story has taken precedence in a game and it was still well received. The Walking Dead series is a good example of this, particularly Season 1. With Metal Gear Solid 2, I thought that the story was so good that it surpassed the gameplay, even though the gameplay was obviously already good. But of course, there are instances where games overall have suffered when stories were prioritized. I recently finished playing the aforementioned Soma, for example, and while I really liked the story, the gameplay drove me nuts at times for being so poorly developed. A fellow YouTuber, Joseph Anderson, actually agrees with me on this assessment. Anyways, to summarize, it's really a case-by-case basis. Generally, gameplay should take precedence, yes, but stories are not the problem with video games, in my estimation. Derek Gregory writes, to sum this up in a simple manner, most human beings are sheep and incapable of separating truth from BS. As a Christian, I'll look to the Bible for guidance. rather than other biased humans, or as is the case in this video game, AI. The Bible even says we are sheep. We think we're so advanced and intelligent, but that's part of our problem. Does anybody want to tell him? No. Anyways, look, Derek, I'm going to be nice to you, okay? Though I am a former Christian, I do see utility and knowledge in some religious tradition. Now, having said that, though, if you believe in God, and you believe that the Bible is the supreme tool for guidance, I would advise that you read literature that is critical of the Bible. Not because I'm looking to deter you from religion, not at all, but rather knowing how to respond to common anti-religious arguments will theoretically strengthen your belief and relationship with God. A decent place to start is with some of Friedrich Nietzsche's famous writings, although he might be a little bit too difficult for some people. Although if you want to start with something a little bit easier, try reading the first few chapters of Carl Jung's Answer to Job. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts. Potato Lord 73, I love that name. I haven't played the game, but it seems they have been censoring censorship, things that obscure the truth even if the original fact hasn't been banned. And that, I think, they actually enhance our free will, as with a better understanding of what the situation and what effect our actions will cause, we can then achieve our goals more successfully. Okay, I see the logic in your point, Potato Lord, but unfortunately I think it's ultimately faulty. It goes back to what I said to Henry Bleich. How do we know we can even construct a self-aware AI that will work in our best interests? What if our future is reflected in something like the Terminator franchise? What if there's some miscalculation that dooms us all? In that case, our faith in an AI will be as problematic as faith in certain religions or cults. That faith might foster our tribalistic instincts and lead to violent conflict. But let me suggest another instance. Let's say we actually could construct perfect AIs that could create context and weed out bad information. Then supposedly we could live in harmony with fact and reason and create a utopia on Earth, right? In the words of Fyodor Dostoevsky, all human beings would have to do is sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species. It would be a perfectly logical and rational existence. However, what makes you think that human beings could tolerate such an existence? Maybe human beings would prefer some form of interesting struggle rather than boring perfection. Well, then maybe you might say, well, the AI could construct some form of interesting trouble that doesn't threaten the structure of a society. Alright. But how do you coax the lazier members of the population to participate in that interesting trouble? Do you force them? Do they suddenly come to their rational senses and see the logic in an AI's plan for humanity? What if they're mentally ill? It's a complicated question, so I'll stop there for the sake of time. Hopefully the hypothetical situations I have just introduced will help you see the point I am making. This final comment comes from Chris Conley, and I won't read the full thing out loud for the sake of time, but I'll summarize. Chris argues that there's actually a form of selection process going on when I asserted that there wasn't. The selection process we have now involves public forums where the masses establish consensus about what information is important. This is actually correct, and I should have said there is no systemic selection process. However, though we have a new selection process, day after day we see how faulty our new selection process is. I mean, one example just off the top of my head is how the left side of the political spectrum chastised the Covington High School kids for demeaning a Native American man for racial reasons, which wasn't true. The facts were there, but the public ignored it in favor of political bias. Another example is how some people asserted that former President Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States, which wasn't true. Again, the facts were there, but the public ignored it in favor of political bias. Though we have greater freedom to decide for ourselves and aren't as prone to media manipulation, the new selection process still has its downsides. Anyway, that's it for this video. I did my best sorting through thousands of comments to find some decent criticism. If I missed your comment and you really want to hear my thoughts, please post it in the comments below. Or if you have a completely new criticism, post that too. I will have my eye on this comment section for the next few weeks and will respond as best I can. Don't think I won't respond, because after all, there's nothing I love more in this world than talking about Metal Gear. It's my religion. And finally, let me just suggest that if you are going to comment or talk with other commenters, be better than how the AI perceives us, please. Don't be insulting or pithy or sarcastic, but engage on the basis of reason and logic. I look forward to talking with you all. Until next time, stay yellow.